All right, my analysts, now for this next one, we're going to go back to our original malware sample that we were working with, so malware.unknown.exe.mals. Now, what I'm about to show you is a tool that might be one of my favorites to use during the initial basic static analysis phase. Now, as it usually goes in cybersecurity, when people started developing out their methodologies for doing static analysis of malware, people started iterating on these tools and making better versions of the same tools. So if you think that in the static analysis phase, we've looked at the strings inside of the binary, we looked at the IAT, we looked at some of the headers inside of the binary, and we looked at some of the bytes inside that had key pieces of information. Now, we used a couple different tools to do that, but eventually people thought, why don't we just make a tool that does a lot of those different things? And so there are a few of those, but one of my favorite is PEStudio. So go ahead and go to the Flare directory on the desktop, and we're going to scroll down to the Utilities section again. And yet again, we will scroll down until we find the slew of PE tools, and we're going to open up this one right here, PEStudio. Now, when PEStudio opens up, you can either drag and drop a file into the window to analyze it, or you can go to Open File here. And we'll go to the desktop, and we'll select malware.unknown.exe.mals. Now, PEStudio does a bunch of things automatically, and why it's one of my favorite tools is because it makes the early stages of static analysis very, very simple and straightforward. So let's look at some of the information on the screen right now. Right off the bat, we already have 3 of our file hashes that we can work with. We've got the MD5, we've got the SHA-256, which are the 2 that we've been using in this course, and we even have the SHA-1 right here. Now, if you are on a system that is connected to the internet, which again, I don't recommend, but if you are, you can actually click on these file hashes, and if you see the link right there, it'll send it to VirusTotal to check that file hash for you. So that actually takes care of the second step. Now, alternatively, if you're on a lab system that does not have an internet connection the way that we've set our lab box up to, you can, of course, copy out this file hash by copying the values and go to VirusTotal and submit them. It also has both the hexadecimal representation and the text representation of the first bytes of the file. Now, this can tell us if it's a portable executable by this first magic byte right here. We see the MZ, so we know that this is a Windows portable executable. It's got the total size in bytes, and it even has the architecture, and we're working in a 32-bit architecture with this portable executable. Now, there are so many other sections here that we can go into to take a look at other kinds of things. PEStudio has kind of an additional layer of analysis that it likes to put on top of all of the other kind of basic information about a portable executable. And so one of those layers of information is the indicators. PEStudio has, as part of the program, a bunch of information about certain strings or patterns that it sees in a portable executable, and if those tend to be malicious or not. And you see that we have the indicators here. We go by level from most severe to least severe. And it picks up a couple of things right off the bat. The file imports symbols, the file references a URL pattern, and here we see that we have that URL that we saw earlier in the strings. As I mentioned earlier in the course, there are certain libraries that are not necessarily evil right out the gate, but they do imply that there may be some kind of malicious intention behind them. Now, once we get an idea of some of these indicators, we can go into the different sections and take a look at the specifics of this binary. And we can look at things like the libraries. Now, these are all of the DLLs that the portable executable loads in to be able to execute its program. And some of these are pretty benign. Kernel 32, you're going to see a lot all over the place. Shell 32, you're going to see all over the place. But we do have this column here that I will refer to as the block list. Not necessarily the name of the column itself, but that's what I will be referring to it in this course. And you might be able to see that some of the DLLs that are imported are likely to be used in malicious software, like URLmon and WinINet. And let's say you don't know what these libraries are or maybe what they do. Well, we also have a description field over here. And so URLmon and WinINet are noted as potentially malicious because URLmon is the embedded library for OLE32 extensions for Windows. OLE is object linking and embedding, which allows different Microsoft Office components to talk to each other and is constantly used for malicious software purposes. And wininet.dll is the internet extensions for Windows DLL, and that's not, of course, by itself malicious, but is commonly abused by threat actors and cyber criminals to download things from the internet, open up sockets, that kind of thing. And then the last thing that we want to look at is the strings of the binary. And of course, we've already covered the strings, but there is, again, an additional layer of analysis that's happening with PEstudio in which we can sort by the string value, we can look at the size of the strings, and sometimes the bigger strings are the ones we want to be paying attention to. But of course, we also have the hint column here, which is also very interesting. So the hint column is very interesting because PEstudio will take its best guess at what it thinks the string is doing. And we can see that it identifies some of these ping and open strings as utility. And that's pretty spot on, right? It also identifies Mozilla 5.0 as a user agent. Spot on. So PEstudio is pretty good at picking this stuff out. And if we rank by the bad list here, we can take a look at some of the strings that PEstudio is saying these are likely to be abused. And it looks like they've got a couple ones that are interesting here. Of course, URL download to file and internet open URL, two common APIs that are used for malicious purposes. And PEstudio has flagged those as bad strings. And so all of this is to say that when you sit down to start to do your static analysis of a binary, PEstudio can be a very, very powerful application to help you speed things along. So that wraps up our basic static analysis section. We're going to move into the basic dynamic analysis, which means that we're actually going to start running the binaries inside of our lab and recording what we see. And I think that we're now pretty well set up to take these little pieces of information from the static analysis section and apply them in the basic dynamic analysis section to find out more about these binaries and what they're doing. So meet me in the next video.